Sarah Mitchell stood at the window of her small apartment above the flower shop, watching the rain pour down on Main Street. At 28, she had built walls around her heart so high that no man had ever come close to climbing them. The people in Millbrook whispered about her behind closed doors, wondering why such a beautiful woman lived alone, never dating, never letting anyone get too close. The truth was buried deep in her past, locked away like a secret she never wanted to share. 5 years ago, her life had been completely different. She had been engaged to David, a successful lawyer from the city. Everyone said they were the perfect couple. Sarah had believed it too, until that terrible night when everything changed. She touched the small scar above her left eyebrow, a reminder of what happened when she tried to leave David the first time. The memory still made her hands shake. The way he had grabbed her, thrown her against the wall, and then cried afterward, promising it would never happen again. But it did happen again, and again, until Sarah realized that the man she loved was slowly destroying her soul. The day she finally escaped, she had nothing but a small bag of clothes and her grandmother's old recipe book. She drove until her car broke down in Millbrook, a tiny town nestled between rolling hills and endless farmland. Something about the quiet streets and friendly faces made her stay. She used her savings to buy the old flower shop from Mrs. Henderson, who was retiring after 40 years of business. Now, 5 years later, Sarah had created a peaceful life for herself. Her flower shop, Blooming Dreams, was the heart of the community. She arranged flowers for weddings, funerals, and every celebration in between. The townspeople loved her gentle nature and artistic touch, but they also noticed how she never attended the town dances, never joined in when the local men tried to ask her out. "Morning, Sarah," called out Jenny Walsh as she entered the shop, shaking raindrops from her umbrella. Jenny owned the bakery next door and had become Sarah's closest friend in town. "Terrible weather we're having." "Good morning, Jenny. Yes, it's quite a storm," Sarah replied, arranging white roses in a crystal vase. Her hands moved with practiced grace, each stem placed perfectly. "What brings you by so early?" Jenny grinned and leaned against the counter. "I wanted to tell you about the new neighbor before the gossip mill gets to you. Old Mr. Peterson finally sold the ranch to some fellow from Montana. He's supposed to arrive today, despite this weather." Sarah's hands paused for just a moment. The Peterson ranch bordered the edge of town, a sprawling property that had been empty for months since Mr. Peterson moved to live with his daughter in the city. "That's nice. I hope he likes small-town life." "Word is he's a real cowboy type. Tall, rugged, keeps to himself. Sounds mysterious, doesn't it?" Jenny winked playfully. Sarah forced a smile and continued with her arrangement. "I'm sure he'll fit in just fine." The last thing she needed was another man in town trying to get her attention. She had perfected the art of polite rejection, always kind but firmly distant. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Thompson hurried in, soaking wet. "Sarah, dear, I need your help. My granddaughter's wedding is this Saturday, and the florist in the city just canceled on us. Can you possibly handle the arrangements?" Sarah's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. Let's sit down and discuss what you need." This was why she loved her work. She could pour all her caring and creativity into making other people's special moments beautiful without having to risk her own heart. As the morning wore on, Sarah lost herself in planning the wedding flowers. She sketched designs for bridal bouquets, centerpieces, and church decorations. The work gave her purpose and joy, filling the empty spaces in her life that she refused to acknowledge. Around noon, the storm finally began to clear. Sarah was arranging a delivery of fresh lilies when she heard a commotion outside. Through her window, she could see a crowd gathering near the town square. Curious despite herself, she stepped outside to see what was happening. A large truck had skidded on the wet road and crashed into the old oak tree in the center of the square. The driver was standing beside the vehicle, clearly frustrated but unharmed. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn cowboy hat and boots that had seen many miles. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the concern on his weathered face as townspeople gathered to help. "That must be our new neighbor." Jenny appeared beside her, slightly out of breath from running over from the bakery. "Not exactly the entrance he was planning, I bet." Sarah watched as the man politely declined help from several people, insisting he could handle the situation himself. There was something about his quiet dignity that caught her attention. He wasn't demanding or angry like she expected. Instead, he seemed genuinely worried about the tree he had hit. Sheriff Reynolds arrived and began directing traffic around the scene. The tow truck would take at least an hour to arrive from the next town over. Sarah noticed the stranger looking around, probably wondering where he could wait without being in anyone's way. Without really thinking about it, Sarah found herself walking toward the square. She stopped several feet away, maintaining her usual safe distance but close enough to speak. "Excuse me," she called out softly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I own the flower shop across the street. You're welcome to wait there if you'd like. I have coffee and it's warm and dry." The man turned toward her and Sarah felt her breath catch. His eyes were the deepest blue she had ever seen, kind and honest, with tiny lines around them that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. When he smiled, it was gentle and grateful. "That's very kind of you, ma'am. I'm Jake Morrison. I hate to impose, but I'd appreciate that very much." His voice was deep and warm, with a slight drawl that suggested he really was from Montana. Sarah nodded and turned to lead the way, her heart beating faster than it had in years. She told herself it was just common courtesy, helping a stranger in need. But as she held the shop door open for Jake Morrison, she couldn't ignore the strange flutter in her chest. "Please sit wherever you're comfortable," she said, gesturing to the small seating area she had created near the window. "How do you take your coffee?" "Black is fine, thank you." Jake removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair with touches of silver at the temples. He looked around the shop with genuine appreciation. "This is beautiful. You've created something really special here." Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she always kept ready for customers. "Thank you. It's taken some time to get it just right." She handed him the cup, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I can tell everything has been chosen with care." Jake's eyes met hers for a moment, and Sarah felt that dangerous flutter again. She quickly looked away, focusing on straightening flowers that didn't need straightening. "So you're taking over the Peterson place?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "Yes, ma'am. It's been my dream for years to have my own ranch. When this property became available, I knew it was meant to be." Jake's voice carried a warmth that made Sarah glance at him again. "I'm planning to raise cattle and maybe some horses. Nothing too fancy, just honest work on good land." Sarah found herself genuinely curious about his story. "What made you leave Montana?" Jake was quiet for a moment, looking out at the town square where his truck was being prepared for towing. "Sometimes life takes you in directions you never expected. I needed a fresh start, someplace where I could build something new." There was something in his tone that made Sarah wonder if he, too, was running from something. But she pushed the thought away. It wasn't her business, and getting curious about Jake Morrison was the last thing she should be doing. "Small towns can be good for that," she said simply. "I hope so." Jake turned back to her, and again Sarah felt caught by those honest blue eyes. "What about you? Have you lived here long?" "5 years," Sarah replied, then quickly added, "I should check on your truck, see if the tow truck has arrived yet." She moved to the window, putting distance between them. Outside, she could see Sheriff Reynolds still directing traffic, but no sign of the tow truck yet. When she turned back, Jake was studying her flower arrangements with obvious interest. "My mother loved flowers," he said quietly. "She had a garden that covered half our backyard. Roses, daisies, sunflowers tall as a fence post. She said flowers were proof that beautiful things could grow anywhere if you gave them enough love." Something in his voice made Sarah's chest tight. "She sounds like a wonderful woman." "She was. I lost her 2 years ago." Jake's fingers traced the edge of a rose petal with surprising gentleness. "Cancer. She fought it hard, but in the end." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. She knew the pain of loss, though hers came from different circumstances. "Thank you. She's actually part of the reason I'm here. Before she passed, she made me promise I'd stop drifting and find a place to call home. Said I had too much love inside me to waste it wandering." Jake's smile was sad but peaceful. The Peterson Ranch felt like the answer to that promise. Sarah didn't know what to say. His honesty was both beautiful and terrifying. She wasn't used to people sharing their hearts so openly, especially not men. In her experience, when men seemed too good to be true, they usually were. The sound of a diesel engine outside interrupted her thoughts. The tow truck had finally arrived. Jake stood up and reached for his wallet. "What do I owe you for the coffee?" "Nothing, it was my pleasure." Sarah moved toward the door, ready to escort him out and return to her safe, predictable routine. Jake put his hat back on and paused at the door. "Miss Mitchell, I want to thank you for your kindness. It means more than you know to be welcomed so warmly." "You're very welcome, Mr. Morrison. I hope you love Millbrook as much as it will love you." As Jake walked across the street to deal with his truck, Sarah watched from behind her counter. She told herself she was just being neighborly, but she couldn't deny the strange warmth spreading through her chest. Jake Morrison was different from any man she had ever met. There was a genuine kindness about him, a quiet strength that didn't feel threatening. But Sarah had learned the hard way that first impressions could be deceiving. David had seemed perfect, too, in the beginning. Charming, successful, attentive. It wasn't until after they were engaged that his true nature began to show. She shook her head firmly and turned back to her work. Jake Morrison seemed like a good man, but Sarah had sworn off good men along with all the others. Her life was peaceful now, predictable and safe. She had her shop, her flowers, and her carefully constructed solitude. That was enough. It had to be enough. But as she arranged Mrs. Thompson's granddaughter's wedding flowers that afternoon, Sarah found her mind wandering to blue eyes and gentle hands that touched rose petals like they were made of silk. She caught herself wondering what Jake's ranch would look like, whether he would plant a garden like his mother's, whether he would truly find the home he was searching for. By evening, the storm had completely cleared, leaving the air clean and fresh. Sarah closed her shop and climbed the stairs to her small apartment. She made herself a simple dinner and settled in with a book, the same routine she had followed for 5 years. But tonight, something felt different. The apartment felt smaller somehow, quieter in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable. She found herself looking out the window toward the road that led to the Peterson ranch, wondering if Jake Morrison was settling into his new home. She pulled the curtains closed and told herself firmly that whatever she was feeling, it would pass. She had built her walls for good reasons, and one kind stranger with honest eyes wasn't going to tear them down. She was stronger than that. She had to be. But as Sarah lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the small town settling into sleep, she couldn't quite shake the memory of Jake's voice talking about his mother's garden, or the way he had looked at her flowers with such genuine appreciation. For the first time in 5 years, Sarah Mitchell fell asleep thinking about a man, and for the first time in just as long, those thoughts didn't fill her with fear. Outside her window, the stars shone down on Millbrook, on the flower shop where dreams bloomed in careful arrangements, and on the road that led to a ranch where a lonely cowboy was probably looking at those same stars and thinking about fresh starts and the kindness of strangers. Neither Sarah nor Jake knew it yet, but their lives had just begun to change in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the courage it takes to let someone past the walls we build around our hearts. The next few weeks passed quietly in Millbrook, but Sarah found herself noticing things she had never paid attention to before. She saw Jake's truck driving through town every few days when he came in for supplies. She heard the townspeople talking about how polite and hardworking he was, how he had already started fixing up the old ranch house and mending fences. Mrs. Henderson, who had sold Sarah the flower shop, stopped by one afternoon with local gossip and homemade cookies. "That new rancher is certainly making an impression," she said, settling into the chair by the window. "He helped the Millers fix their broken fence without being asked, and when little Tommy Watson's ball went over into his property, he brought it back with a bag of apples from the old tree." Sarah arranged autumn flowers in a harvest display, trying to look uninterested. "That's nice of him. He's been asking around about local businesses, wanting to support the community. Jenny mentioned he's been buying his bread from her every week, and he gets his coffee at Murphy's Diner." Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Haven't seen him in your shop since that first day, though." "Why would he need flowers?" Sarah asked, perhaps a little too quickly. "Oh, I don't know. Some folks just like having beautiful things around." Mrs. Henderson bit into a cookie thoughtfully. "Course, some folks are too shy to come calling without a good reason." Sarah's cheeks warmed. "I'm sure Mr. Morrison has plenty to keep him busy with the ranch." The truth was, Sarah had been secretly disappointed that Jake hadn't returned to her shop. She told herself it was better this way, that keeping her distance was the smart thing to do. But every time she heard his truck drive past, she found herself glancing toward the window. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Sarah was closing the shop when she heard a commotion from the direction of the elementary school. Children's voices carried on the wind, some laughing, others crying. Sarah locked her door and hurried toward the sound. She found a crowd gathered around the old playground equipment behind the school. 8-year-old Lucy Peterson, Mr. Peterson's great-niece, who was visiting for the week, had climbed too high on the monkey bars and was now hanging upside down, her foot caught in the metal bars. She was crying from fear and pain, and the other children didn't know how to help her. Mrs. Garcia, the teacher who had been supervising the after-school play time, looked up at Lucy with worry. "I've called the fire department, but they're dealing with a barn fire on the other side of the county. It could be 30 minutes before they get here." "I'm scared," Lucy sobbed, her face red from hanging upside down. "My foot really hurts." Sarah looked around at the gathered adults, all of them too short or not strong enough to reach Lucy safely. The monkey bars were old and high, designed for bigger children, and getting Lucy down would require someone tall and strong who could climb up and carefully untangle her foot. Just then, Jake Morrison's truck pulled into the school parking lot. Sarah watched him get out and quickly assess the situation. Without hesitation, he strode over to the playground equipment. "Hey there, sweetheart," he called up to Lucy, his voice calm and reassuring. "My name's Jake. I'm going to get you down okay." Lucy sniffled and nodded. "It hurts really bad." "I know it does, but we'll have you safe in just a minute." Jake tested the strength of the monkey bars, then looked at Mrs. Garcia. "I'm going to climb up and support her while I free her foot. Can someone position themselves below to help once I get her loose?" Sarah stepped forward without thinking. "I'll help." Jake's eyes met hers for a brief moment, and she saw surprise and gratitude there. He nodded and began climbing the monkey bars with surprising agility for such a big man. His movements were careful and confident as he positioned himself next to Lucy. "Okay, Lucy, I'm right here with you," Jake said softly. "I'm going to hold you steady while I work on your foot. You're being so brave." Sarah positioned herself directly below, ready to help guide Lucy down. She could see Jake's gentle hands supporting the little girl while he carefully examined how her foot was trapped. His touch was tender and patient, and Lucy's crying began to quiet as she realized she was safe. "There we go," Jake murmured, working to free Lucy's sneaker from where it had wedged between two bars. "Just a little more. Got it." With Lucy's foot free, Jake carefully helped her turn right side up and began lowering her toward Sarah's waiting arms. The moment was more intimate than Sarah had expected. She could smell Jake's clean scent of soap and fresh air, could see the concentration in his blue eyes as he made sure Lucy was safe. "I've got her," Sarah said softly, reaching up to take Lucy's weight as Jake lowered her down. Lucy wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck, still sniffling but no longer crying. "Thank you, Miss Sarah. Thank you, Mr. Jake." Jake climbed down and immediately knelt beside them to examine Lucy's ankle. His touch was gentle as he checked for serious injury. "Just a little swollen, but nothing's broken. You're going to be fine, Lucy." Mrs. Garcia hurried over with an ice pack from the school's first aid kit. "Lucy, your aunt is on her way to pick you up. Mr. Morrison, I can't thank you enough. I don't know what we would have done without you." "Just glad I was driving by at the right time," Jake replied, but his eyes kept drifting to Sarah. Miss Mitchell was the real hero, staying calm and being ready to help. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Anyone would have done the same. "Not everyone," Jake said quietly, and something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. There was a depth to his words that suggested he had known people who wouldn't have helped, people who only cared about themselves. As the crowd began to disperse and Lucy was reunited with her worried aunt, Sarah found herself standing alone with Jake in the gathering twilight. The autumn air was crisp, and the first stars were beginning to appear above the small town. "Thank you for helping with Lucy," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "She's a sweet little girl, reminds me of my niece back in Montana." Jake's expression grew wistful. "It's good to see kids playing and being kids, you know. Sometimes the world feels like it's forgotten how to be innocent." There was something in his voice that made Sarah curious despite her usual caution. "Do you miss Montana, your family?" Jake was quiet for a moment, looking up at the darkening sky. "I miss some things about it, but my brother and we don't see eye to eye anymore, haven't for a long time." He glanced at Sarah, then away. "Sometimes family can hurt you worse than strangers ever could." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She knew exactly what he meant, though her pain had come from someone she had loved rather than family. The understanding passed between them without words, a recognition of shared wounds that ran deeper than they usually showed the world. "I should be getting back," Sarah said softly, suddenly afraid of how much she was relating to this man. "Thank you again for what you did today." "Sarah," Jake's voice stopped her as she turned to leave. Would you? Would you like to have dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just Murphy's Diner, or maybe I could cook something at the ranch. I make a decent pot roast." The invitation hung in the air between them. Sarah felt panic rise in her chest, the familiar fear that had kept her safe for 5 years. Her automatic response was ready, a polite but firm no, followed by a kind but distant smile. But as she looked at Jake standing there in the fatting light, his hat in his hands and vulnerability written across his weathered features, the words wouldn't come. He wasn't demanding or pushy. He was simply asking, prepared to accept whatever answer she gave him. I don't really date," Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, his expression understanding rather than disappointed. "I figured as much, but I wasn't really talking about dating. I was thinking more about two people who might enjoy each other's company, sharing a meal and conversation. No expectations, no pressure, just friendship." Friendship, Sarah tried the word on in her mind. She had friends in town like Jenny and Mrs. Henderson, but she had never had a male friend, had never trusted a man enough to let him into her life in any capacity. "I don't know," she said honestly. "How about this?" Jake said gently. "I'll be making that pot roast this Sunday afternoon around 2 o'clock. If you decide you'd like to join me, you know where to find me. If you don't, that's perfectly fine too. No hard feelings either way." The offer was perfect in its lack of pressure. He was giving her complete control, letting her decide without having to commit in advance. It was the kind of considerate gesture that made Sarah's walls feel both stronger and more fragile at the same time. "That's very kind of you," she said. Jake put his hat back on and touched the brim politely. "Have a good evening, Sarah. Thank you again for helping with Lucy." As Sarah walked back to her shop in the growing darkness, her mind was spinning. Jake Morrison was proving to be nothing like any man she had ever known. He was patient where others had been demanding, gentle where others had been rough, understanding where others had been selfish. But understanding and kindness were exactly what had drawn her to David in the beginning. He had seemed perfect, too, until the mask came off and she saw the monster underneath. How could she trust her judgment when it had failed her so completely before? That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about friendship and pot roast, about honest blue eyes and gentle hands that could rescue frightened children. She thought about Jake's words about family hurting worse than strangers, and wondered what pain he carried behind his patient smile. Most of all, she thought about Sunday afternoon, and whether she had the courage to take even the smallest step outside the safe walls she had built around her heart. The days leading up to Sunday passed slowly. Sarah threw herself into her work, arranging flowers for the autumn festival and taking on extra orders to keep her mind busy. But she couldn't stop thinking about Jake's invitation, couldn't stop wondering what it would be like to sit at a dinner table with a man without feeling afraid. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected test of her feelings. Sarah was arranging chrysanthemums when she heard raised voices from the street outside. Through her window, she saw Jake standing near his truck, facing two men she didn't recognize. Their body language was aggressive, and Jake's was carefully controlled. Sarah moved closer to the window, worried. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the tension in the scene. The two strangers were clearly upset about something, and Jake was listening with his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. After several minutes, the men got back in their car and drove away, leaving Jake standing alone by his truck. He ran his hands through his hair and looked around, clearly shaken by whatever had just happened. Without thinking, Sarah opened her shop door and called out, "Jake, are you okay?" He looked over at her, his expression grateful for the concern. "I'm fine, just some folks who followed me from Montana, old business that I thought I'd left behind." The worry in his voice made Sarah step out onto the sidewalk. "Do you want to talk about it?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "My brother got involved with some people who weren't good for him. When I tried to help him get out, they decided I was interfering with their business. I thought moving here would end it, but apparently they're more persistent than I hoped." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "Are you in danger?" "No, nothing like that. They're just trying to scare me into convincing my brother to come back. But I can't do that to him, not when I know what they're capable of." Jake's jaw tightened. He's clean now, has been for 6 months. I won't be the reason he throws that away. The protective love in Jake's voice was unmistakable. Here was a man who had given up everything to protect his brother, who had come to a new town to start over but was still fighting battles from his past. Sarah knew something about fighting battles and starting over. "If you need anything," she said quietly, "anything at all, please let me know." Jake's expression softened. "Thank you, Sarah, that means more than you know." As Jake drove away, Sarah realized something had shifted inside her. Seeing him vulnerable, seeing the evidence that he too carried scars from his past, made him seem less threatening somehow. He wasn't a perfect man with no problems. He was human, flawed, struggling with his own demons just like she was. Saturday evening found Sarah standing in front of her closet, staring at her clothes, and trying to decide what to wear to not a date at a ranch for pot roast with a man who might be becoming a friend. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her, but neither was the fact that she was seriously considering going. She had spent 5 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation, but something about Jake Morrison made all her careful rules seem less important than they once had. Maybe it was the way he had rescued Lucy without hesitation, or the way he had stood up to those men while keeping himself under control. Maybe it was simply that he was the first person in 5 years who had looked at her and seen someone worth knowing, not someone to be fixed or conquered. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather. Sarah went through her usual routine of coffee and reading, but her mind kept drifting to the clock on her wall. 2 o'clock seemed both impossibly far away and approaching too quickly. At 1:30, she found herself standing in front of her mirror, wearing a simple blue sweater and jeans, her hair soft around her shoulders. She looked like a woman who might go to a friend's house for Sunday dinner. She looked normal. But normal was something Sarah hadn't felt in so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like. At 5 minutes to 2, Sarah Mitchell picked up her purse and the small bouquet of wildflowers she had arranged that morning. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her heart was beating fast enough that she could hear it in her ears. But for the first time in 5 years, Sarah was about to have dinner with a man because she wanted to, not because she was afraid to say no. And as she walked toward her car and the road that led to the Peterson Ranch, she couldn't decide if that made her brave or foolish. Either way, she was about to find out. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel as she turned down the dusty road that led to the Peterson Ranch. Every instinct told her to turn around, to go back to her safe apartment and her predictable routine. But something stronger than fear kept her driving forward. The ranch appeared around a bend in the road, and Sarah had to admit it was beautiful. The old farmhouse had been freshly painted white with blue shutters, and someone had clearly spent time repairing the front porch and planting flowers in the beds around the foundation. Jake had kept his word about making it a home. Sarah parked her car and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the kitchen window, she could see Jake moving around inside, and the sight of him in his own space made this feel suddenly more real and more terrifying. She grabbed the wildflower bouquet and walked to the front door before she could change her mind. Her knock was soft, almost hesitant. Jake opened the door wearing jeans and a simple gray button-down shirt, his sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His face lit up with genuine pleasure when he saw her. "Sarah, you came." His smile was warm and relieved, as if he hadn't been entirely sure she would show up. "I brought these," she said, holding out the flowers, "from my garden behind the shop." "They're beautiful, thank you." Jake accepted the bouquet with the same gentle care she had seen him use with Lucy. "Please, come in. I hope you're hungry because I may have made enough pot roast for half the town." Sarah stepped inside and immediately felt the warmth of the house. Jake had transformed the old ranch into something welcoming and comfortable. The furniture was simple but well chosen, and every room showed evidence of careful attention. Family photographs sat on the mantel, and books lined shelves built into the wall. "Jake, this is lovely. You've done so much work." "It's been my project for the past month. Gives me something to do with my hands while I figure out the ranch part." He gestured toward the kitchen. "Can I get you something to drink? I have coffee, sweet tea, or water." "Sweet tea sounds perfect." Sarah followed him into the kitchen, which smelled incredible. The pot roast was clearly the real thing, not some fancy version from a cookbook. Jake poured her tea from a pitcher and leaned against the counter. "I have to admit, I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "I wasn't sure either," Sarah said honestly. I almost turned around 3 times on the drive over. What changed your mind? Sarah considered the question while she sipped her tea. I think I realized that I've been letting fear make all my decisions for so long that I forgot what it felt like to choose something because I wanted it. Jake's expression grew serious. Fear's a powerful thing. Sometimes it keeps us safe, and sometimes it keeps us from living. There was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him more carefully. You sound like you know about that. More than I'd like. Jake checked the pot roast in the oven, then turned back to her. Can I ask you something, Sarah? And if it's too personal, just tell me to mind my own business. Sarah tensed slightly but nodded. That first day in your shop, when I asked if you'd lived here long, you got this look in your eyes, like you were remembering something you'd rather forget. And just now, when you talked about fear making your decisions, I recognize that look because I've seen it in my own mirror. Sarah set down her tea glass with hands that weren't quite steady. I don't really talk about my past. Neither do I usually. Jake moved closer, but not so close that she felt trapped. But sitting here with you feels different somehow, like maybe we both understand what it's like to start over. The kitchen fell quiet except for the soft bubbling of the pot roast and the tick of an old clock on the wall. Sarah looked at Jake's honest face and made a decision that surprised her. I was engaged before I came to Millbrook, to a man named David. Everyone thought he was perfect, including me, until he showed me who he really was. Her voice was steady, but Jake could see her hands trembling. He hurt me, Jake, not just once but many times, and he was so good at making me believe it was my fault that I almost started to believe it myself. Jake's jaw tightened, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. I'm sorry that happened to you. No one deserves that, especially not from someone who's supposed to love them. The day I finally left, he told me that no one would ever want damaged goods like me, that I'd never be able to trust another man again. Sarah's laugh was bitter. For 5 years, it felt like he was right. He was wrong, Jake said firmly. He was trying to control you even as you were leaving, trying to make sure his damage would last even if he couldn't. Jake paused, then continued more softly. My brother was in an abusive relationship too, though his was different from yours. It took him years to understand that the things they told him about himself weren't true. Sarah looked up at him in surprise. Is that why those men came looking for you? Because of your brother's ex? Jake nodded grimly. David sounds like he was a master at psychological abuse. My brother's ex was more direct. She got him hooked on drugs, then used his addiction to control him. When he finally got clean and tried to leave, she sent her friends after both of us. Said if she couldn't have him, she'd make sure he never felt safe anywhere. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. They had both loved someone who had been hurt, and they had both paid a price for trying to help that person heal. Is your brother safe now? Sarah asked. He's in a treatment program in California. New name, new life, the whole thing. It's been 6 months since we've talked, but I get updates through his counselor. He's doing well. Jake's smile was proud and sad at the same time. It cost us everything we had built in Montana, but it was worth it to see him free. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the cozy kitchen. You gave up your whole life to protect him. He's my little brother. That's what family does. Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, as if sacrificing everything for someone you love was the most natural thing in the world. The timer on the oven chose that moment to ring, breaking the intensity of their conversation. Jake pulled out the pot roast, and the smell that filled the kitchen was heavenly. I hope you're as hungry as I am, he said, beginning to carve the meat with practiced skill. They settled at Jake's small dining room table, which he had set with care. Real cloth napkins, his grandmother's china, and Sarah's wildflowers in a mason jar centerpiece. The effort he had put into making this special wasn't lost on her. The pot roast was as good as it smelled, tender and flavorful with vegetables that had absorbed all the rich gravy. They ate in comfortable conversation, talking about the town, the ranch, and Sarah's flower shop. It felt natural and easy, like they had been friends for years instead of virtual strangers. This is incredible, Sarah said, tasting the carrots. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mother, mostly. She said any man worth his salt should be able to feed himself and anyone he cares about. Jake's expression grew fond. She made this same recipe every Sunday when I was growing up. I've been trying to recreate it exactly, but I think she left out some secret ingredient she never wrote down. It tastes like love, Sarah said without thinking, then blushed at how sentimental that sounded. But Jake's face lit up. That's exactly what she would have said. Mom always claimed that was the most important ingredient in any recipe. As the afternoon stretched on, Sarah found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't in years. Jake was an easy person to be with. He listened when she talked, shared stories that made her laugh, and never once made her feel pressured or uncomfortable. When he got up to clear their plates, she found herself helping without being asked. "You don't have to do that," he protested as she began washing dishes. "I want to besides you cooked. It's only fair." They worked side by side in the kitchen, and Sarah was amazed by how domestic and normal it felt. When Jake's hand accidentally brushed hers as they reached for the same dish, she didn't flinch or pull away. The contact sent a little thrill through her, but it was excitement rather than fear. "Sarah," Jake said as they finished the dishes, "would you like to see the rest of the ranch? The sunset should be beautiful from the back pasture." Sarah almost said no automatically. Being alone with a man in an isolated place had been one of her biggest fears for 5 years. But looking at Jake's hopeful face, she realized that this fear felt different now. Smaller, somehow, and less important than the possibility of missing something beautiful. "I'd like that." Jake grabbed his jacket and offered Sarah a spare coat that had belonged to Mr. Peterson's wife. They walked out behind the house, where the land stretched out in rolling hills dotted with oak trees. Jake had already repaired much of the fencing, and Sarah could see a small herd of cattle in the distance. "It's going to be beautiful when you're finished," she said, meaning it. "It already is beautiful. I'm just trying not to mess it up." Jake pointed toward a spot near a grove of trees. "I'm thinking about putting a garden there come spring. My mother's roses, if I can get them to grow in this soil." They walked slowly through the pasture, talking about his plans for the ranch and Sarah's ideas for expanding her flower business. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that took Sarah's breath away. "Jake, this is incredible." "It's even better with company," he said softly. They stood together watching the sunset, close enough that Sarah could feel the warmth radiating from Jake's body. When he offered her his arm for support as they walked back over the uneven ground, she took it without hesitation. Back at the house, Sarah knew the evening was coming to an end. She should leave soon, get back to her apartment and her routine. But she found herself reluctant to break the spell of this perfect afternoon. "Thank you for today," she said as they stood by her car. "The food was wonderful and the company was even better." "Thank you for coming, for trusting me enough to be here." Jake's voice was warm in the gathering darkness. "I hope we can do this again sometime." Sarah looked at his honest face in the soft light spilling from the house windows and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not break, but open, like a flower turning toward the sun. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it completely. Jake smiled, the kind of smile that started in his eyes and spread across his whole face. "Good, I'm glad." He walked her to her car and held the door open for her, a gentleman in the old-fashioned sense of the word. As Sarah drove away, she could see him in her rear-view mirror, standing in the circle of light from his porch, watching to make sure she got safely to the main road. The drive back to town passed in a blur of confused emotions. Sarah felt lighter than she had in years, but also terrified by how much she had enjoyed Jake's company. She had shared more of her story with him than she had with anyone else in Millbrook, and instead of feeling exposed and vulnerable, she felt understood. Back in her apartment, Sarah made herself a cup of tea and sat by her window, looking out toward the road that led to Jake's ranch. For the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to let someone into her carefully guarded life. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but the terror felt manageable now. Jake Morrison had shown her that not all men were like David, that kindness and strength could exist in the same person without one being used to mask the other. Over the next few weeks, Jake began stopping by Sarah's flower shop more regularly. Sometimes he had a legitimate need, ordering arrangements for the church or buying a small bouquet for Mrs. Garcia, who had helped with Lucy. But often he just seemed to want to talk. Sarah found herself looking forward to these visits. Jake would lean against her counter and tell her about his progress with the ranch, or share funny stories about learning to deal with cattle. She would update him on the town gossip and show him the flower arrangements she was most proud of. Their friendship grew slowly and naturally, built on small gestures and shared understanding. When Jake mentioned that he missed home-cooked meals, Sarah started saving him slices of the pies and casseroles that neighbors brought to her shop. When Sarah's delivery truck broke down, Jake offered to help her transport arrangements in his pickup. The turning point came on a cold November morning when Sarah arrived at her shop to find the front window shattered. Someone had thrown a rock through it during the night, along with a note that made her blood run cold. "Still think you can hide from me, Sarah? I know where you are now. We have unfinished business. David." Sarah stood in her destroyed shop, shaking so hard she could barely hold the note. After 5 years of peace, David had found her. The safe life she had built was crumbling around her, and she didn't know what to do. She was still standing there in shock when Jake arrived, carrying coffee and pastries from Jenny's bakery. He took one look at her face and the broken window and immediately understood that something was seriously wrong. "Sarah, what happened? Are you hurt?" She wordlessly handed him the note, too scared to speak. Jake read it once, then again, his face growing darker with each word. "This is from him, from David." Sarah nodded, tears starting to fall. "He found me, Jake. After all this time, he found me." Jake carefully set down the coffee and pastries, then moved closer to Sarah. "Hey, look at me. You're not alone this time, okay? We're going to figure this out together." "What if he hurts you?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What if he hurts people I care about to get to me?" The words were out before she realized what she had said. She cared about Jake. Somewhere in the past few weeks, he had become more than just a friend. He had become someone she couldn't bear to see hurt because of her. Jake's expression softened. "Sarah, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not going to let him hurt you or anyone else, but we need to call the sheriff and report this." "You don't understand," Sarah said frantically. "David is smart and rich and charming. He'll convince them that I'm lying, that I'm unstable. He's done it before. Then we'll make sure they listen this time. We'll document everything, get help from people who understand this kind of situation." Jake's voice was calm and determined. "You're not the same scared woman who ran away 5 years ago, Sarah. You're stronger now, and you have people who believe in you." Sheriff Reynolds arrived within minutes of Jake's call, along with Deputy Martinez. Sarah was surprised by how seriously they took the threat, how carefully they documented the broken window and the note. "Miss Mitchell," Sheriff Reynolds said gently, "I want you to know that we take domestic violence very seriously in this county. If this David shows up here, we'll be ready for him." "But what if he doesn't come himself? What if he sends someone else?" Sarah's voice was still shaky. "Then we'll handle that too. In the meantime, I'm going to increase patrols around your shop and your apartment, and I want you to call us immediately if you see anything or anyone suspicious." After the sheriff left, Jake helped Sarah board up her window temporarily and clean up the broken glass. They worked in comfortable silence, and Sarah was grateful for his calm presence. "Jake," she said as they finished, "I need to tell you something. David isn't just violent, he's smart and manipulative, and he has money and connections. He could make life difficult for anyone who tries to help me." Jake stopped what he was doing and looked at her directly. "Sarah, do you remember what I told you about my brother, about the people who came after us in Montana?" She nodded. "I didn't leave Montana because I was afraid of them. I left because staying was putting my brother in danger. But you know what I learned from that whole experience?" "What?" "Running away doesn't solve the problem, it just delays it. And some things are worth standing and fighting for, even if it's scary." Jake's blue eyes were steady and sure. "You're worth standing and fighting for, Sarah." Sarah felt tears start again, but this time they weren't entirely from fear. "I don't know how to fight him. Last time I just ran." "Last time you did what you needed to do to survive. That was brave, Sarah, but this time you don't have to face it alone." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with Jake and Jenny, making plans and safety arrangements. Jake had convinced Jenny to stay the night, and he would be sleeping in his truck outside the building. Sarah protested that it wasn't necessary, but both of them insisted. "Besides," Jenny said with forced cheerfulness, "it'll be like a slumber party. We can do each other's nails and talk about boys." Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling. These people had become her family, and they were rallying around her when she needed them most. 3 days later, David arrived in Millbrook. Sarah was arranging flowers when she saw the familiar black luxury sedan pull up across the street. Her hands immediately began to shake. and she had to grip the counter to keep from falling down. Even after 5 years, the sight of David emerging from his car made her feel like that frightened woman again. But then she remembered Jake's words about being stronger now, and she forced herself to breathe deeply and think clearly. She was not the same woman David had terrorized. She had built a life and a community that cared about her. She had people to call for help. Sarah reached for her phone and called Jake, then Sheriff Reynolds. Both promised to be there within minutes. David crossed the street and entered her shop, his smile as charming and cold as ever. He was still handsome in the polished way that had first attracted her, but now she could see the calculation behind his perfect appearance. "Hello, Sarah, you look well. Small-town life seems to agree with you." "What do you want, David?" Sarah kept the counter between them, her hand near the panic button Jake had installed. "I want to talk to my fiancé. We have a lot to catch up on." "I'm not your fiancé. I haven't been for 5 years." David's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Come now, Sarah. We both know you're not capable of making that kind of decision on your own. You always needed me to help you think clearly." The words that had once made Sarah doubt herself now just made her angry. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in my entire life. You need to leave, David, now." "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, you embarrassed me when you left, made me look bad in front of important people. I've spent 5 years cleaning up the mess you made, and now it's time for you to come home and make things right." Sarah heard the familiar undercurrent of threat in his voice, the subtle promise of consequences if she didn't comply. But before she could respond, Jake walked through the front door. Jake took one look at David and immediately understood who he was dealing with. His posture changed subtly, becoming more alert and protective without appearing aggressive. "Sarah, is everything okay?" His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable message that he was ready for whatever might happen. David turned to assess this new player, and Sarah saw his quick calculation. Jake was bigger, clearly stronger, and obviously not intimidated. "You must be the local entertainment," David said with smooth condescension. "I'm David Harrison, Sarah's fiancé. We're having a private conversation." "I'm Jake Morrison, Sarah's friend, and from where I'm standing it looks like the conversation is over." The two men stared at each other across the small shop, and Sarah could feel the tension crackling between them. David was used to being the most powerful person in any room, but Jake's quiet confidence seemed to unsettle him. "Sarah," David said, not taking his eyes off Jake, "tell your friend that our business is private." "My business is my own," Sarah said firmly, "and I've asked you to leave." Sheriff Reynolds chose that moment to enter the shop, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Miss Mitchell, is there a problem here?" David's mask of charm immediately snapped back into place. "Officer, there's no problem. I'm just visiting an old friend." "Actually, Sheriff, this is David Harrison, the man who sent the threatening note and broke my window." Sarah's voice was stronger now, supported by the people who had come to her aid. Sheriff Reynolds' expression grew serious. "Mr. Harrison, I'm going to need to see some identification. We need to have a conversation about harassment and criminal mischief." David's smile finally faltered. This wasn't going the way he had expected. He was used to dealing with isolated, frightened women and small-town officials who were impressed by his credentials. But Sarah wasn't alone anymore, and Sheriff Reynolds clearly wasn't intimidated by money and power. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," David said carefully. "Sarah and I have a history, and sometimes emotions run high. The only misunderstanding is you thinking you can come into my town and threaten one of my citizens," Sheriff Reynolds replied. "Mr. Morrison, would you mind staying with Miss Mitchell while I have a word with Mr. Harrison outside?" As the sheriff escorted David out of the shop, Sarah's legs finally gave out. She sank into her chair behind the counter, shaking with relief and residual fear. Jake immediately moved to her side, kneeling beside her chair. "Hey, you did great. You were strong and clear, and you didn't let him control the situation." "I was terrified," Sarah whispered. "I know, but you stood up to him anyway. That's what courage is, Sarah, being scared and doing the right thing anyway." Through the window, they could see Sheriff Reynolds having a very serious conversation with David beside his expensive car. Whatever the sheriff was saying, David clearly didn't like it. After several minutes, Sheriff Reynolds returned to the shop while David drove away. "Well, Miss Mitchell, I had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Harrison. Turns out there's a restraining order against him back in the city, filed by another young woman. His lawyer must have forgotten to mention that when they sent the private investigator to find you." Sarah's eyes widened. "Another woman. Seems like you're not his first victim. Anyway, I've made it very clear to Mr. Harrison that he's not welcome in this county. If he comes back, if he contacts you in any way, if he so much as drives through our town on his way somewhere else, I'll arrest him for violation of a restraining order and harassment." "Can you do that?" Sarah asked hopefully. "Ma'am, I've been sheriff in this county for 20 years. I know exactly what I can and can't do to protect the people I serve." Sheriff Reynolds tipped his hat. "You take care now, and remember what I said about calling if you need anything." After the sheriff left, Sarah and Jake stood in her shop, surrounded by the flowers she had arranged that morning. The whole confrontation had lasted less than 30 minutes, but Sarah felt like her entire world had shifted. "Is it really over?" she asked. "I think so. Men like David are bullies, and bullies don't like fair fights. He was counting on you being alone and scared, but instead he found a whole community ready to protect you." Jake's voice was warm with admiration. "You're not his victim anymore, Sarah. You're a strong woman who faced down her past and won." Sarah looked at Jake's honest face, at the concern and pride in his blue eyes, and felt something click into place inside her heart. This man had stood beside her when she needed him most, had helped her find the courage to face her biggest fear. More than that, he had shown her what real love looked like: patient, protective, supportive, without any need to control or diminish. "Jake," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. "I tried not to, tried to keep my walls up, but you just kept being so kind and patient and wonderful that I couldn't help myself." Jake's face lit up with the most beautiful smile Sarah had ever seen. "Sarah Michelle, I've been in love with you since the day you offered me coffee during that rainstorm. I was just waiting for you to feel safe enough to let me tell you." He stepped closer, moving slowly so she had time to pull away if she wanted to. But Sarah didn't want to pull away anymore. She wanted to step forward toward this man who had shown her what it meant to be truly loved and protected. "Can I kiss you?" Jake asked gently. Instead of answering with words, Sarah rose up on her toes and kissed him first. His lips were warm and soft, and his hands came up to cradle her face with the same gentle care he showed her flowers. It was nothing like the demanding, possessive kisses she remembered from her past. This kiss was a question and an answer, a promise and a gift. When they finally broke apart, Sarah was crying again, but this time the tears were from joy. "I love you too, Jake Morrison," she whispered, "and I'm not afraid anymore." Outside, the afternoon sun streamed through the window of blooming dreams, illuminating the flowers Sarah had arranged that morning. But inside, something even more beautiful was blooming, the kind of love that grows slowly and carefully, nurtured by patience and trust, and the courage to let down the walls around a wounded heart. 6 months later, Sarah and Jake were married in the town square under the old oak tree that had witnessed their first real meeting. Sarah wore wildflowers in her hair and carried a bouquet of her grandmother's roses, which Jake had somehow managed to grow in his mother's garden behind the ranch house. The whole town came to celebrate, and as Sarah looked out at all the faces of people who had become her family, she realized that sometimes the best things in life come when you're brave enough to let them. She had built walls to protect herself from the past, but with Jake's help, she had learned to build doors instead, doors that could open to let in love and trust, and all the beautiful possibilities that came with them. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Sarah whispered in Jake's ear, "Thank you for falling into my life." Jake smiled and held her closer. "Thank you for catching me when I did." And in the flower shop across the square, the evening light touched the arrangements Sarah had made for her own wedding, filling blooming dreams with golden light, and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come.